Welcome to the Four Visions Market Podcast, a space built on the principles of integrity and reciprocity. Together, we will engage in thought-provoking conversations about plant medicines, why these plants are coming out of the rainforests, jungles, and mountains after thousands of years, and what it means to be in right relationship with the ancestral wisdom cultures and guardians of these traditions. I'm your host, Mariah Ganessa, founder and director of Four Visions Market. This podcast is the natural evolution in our commitment to providing you, our tribe, with incredible resources to support you on your healing journey through plant medicines. Welcome home. Welcome back, Four Visions Tribe. This week on the podcast, we are joined by Mikaela de la Myco, a mother, mushroom educator, and ceremony facilitator for a beautiful conversation all about mushrooms, conscious parenting, and walking in reciprocal relationship with the plants. Mikaela de la Myco grew up in a first-generation Italian, Afro-Caribbean, and indigenous Mexican family in unceded Tongva territory in Los Angeles, California. She serves all people in ceremonial work to uncover their ancestor codes, rewrite trauma, and make meaning with mushroom and other earth medicines. Her platform, Mama de la Myco, centers the rematriation of psychedelic practice and the MushWOMB Consciousness. In today's episode, we go deep into an incredible conversation focused on the holy mushroom, as well as Mikayla's terminology of this concept of MushWOMB consciousness, the use of plant medicine and entheogens in the parenting journey, and much, much more. Mikayla is a soul filled with so much wisdom and reverence for the sacred mushroom, and this being the first episode on mushrooms in this show, I feel like it is a super special way to open this beautiful conversation. So thank you for tuning in and enjoy today's episode.
A quick word from our sponsors before we begin this episode.
When working with powerful plant allies and teachers, we're given a new awareness and a deeper understanding of ourselves, the world around us, and the energies in our lives. One of the most challenging parts of working with plant medicine is integrating the experience. In ceremony, our plant teachers show us the path, but it is then our responsibility to take action in our daily lives. Mushroom microdosing has helped me tremendously in this process, allowing me to keep messages and insights from ceremony in the forefront of my awareness. This is key in the integration process because it helps us to bring the technology of the ancient wisdom we receive through ceremony into lasting, sustainable transformation and change. If you are looking for the right place to source high-quality, ethical, made-in-prayer mushroom microdoses, look no further. Four Visions Market is proud to endorse Connect Chocolate in their 30-day microdose protocol. Visit connectchocolate.life and use the code FVFamily for 10% off your first order. According to a journal published by the National Library of Medicine, individuals who microdose describe a wide variety of psychological benefits, including enhanced creativity, increased energy, improved social ability, sharper focus, stronger analytical thinking, more positive mood, improved memory, and increased mindfulness and general sense of well-being. Connect Chocolate was founded by a member of the Four Visions community, and their mission is to cultivate kinship with earth and spirit. This 30-day at-home treatment will take you on a journey to support your emotional, spiritual, and mental well-being. Go to connectchocolate.life or visit the link in our show notes. And remember to use the code FVFamily for 10% off your first order. Well, welcome, Mikayla. It's so wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on and being open to this beautiful conversation that we're going to have today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back. It's been a really long time since I've seen you, so I'm really honored that we found each other in this place now.
Yes, I know we were just talking a few minutes ago. I think it's been almost 10 years since we've been together, and it's so beautiful to see how our paths have just led us on these beautiful journeys of self-empowerment and discovery. And here we are together today in a completely new way to get to drop in and meet one another again.
Yeah, absolutely. And, what you taught and what you shared when we were together absolutely changed my life. So, I owe a lot of what I do in my practice to the weekend that I spent with you in Nevada City. So, thank you for that. And thank you for redirecting, yeah, a lot of my existence, whether you knew it or not. I really integrated a lot of what was shared. And that set me on a course in which I'm walking now.
Wow, that's so beautiful. What an honor. And thank you so much for sharing
Hmm.
that. I'm humbled.
Yeah, of course.
Bueno, well, let us begin with an introduction to who you are and beautiful path that you're walking today so that our listeners can connect a little bit further with you. And maybe today we can start off from, a little bit different than who is Mikayla, but to share a little bit more about you, more from your story of origin as a framework for who you have become and your life's work and your connection to your ancestral lineage that has set you on this path of healing that you're walking on today.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the origins that kind of trace to exactly where I'm at now, it really starts with the choices that all my ancestors made and where my ancestors are from and where in the world they're from and where they were living. And so on my mother's side of the family, my mother was born and raised in southern Italy. And so her influence like really guides my connection to plants and my connection to food and my connection to basically like out of clinic care, right? Out of hospital care. Because in her tiny little hometown, in a place called Accadia Foggia, which is 2 hours south of Rome, she's in these like tucked away hilltops that, the nearest hospital was, more than an hour away. So for generation after generation, we pretty much just took care of ourselves with what was around, with homesteading skills, and birthed a lot of babies, and most of them at home. And so that was really important to me, kind of like coming into my motherhood journey, because I was a cesarean section birth. My sister was a cesarean section birth. And knowing my mother's womb story helped me gather the awareness that, I'm only a generation out of home birth. It's not too late to go back. Just because my birth was medicalized does not mean that, it has to be medicalized forever. So that was a really important piece for me. And also on my father's side, his mother is a detribalized indigenous woman who was born along the borderlands of the US Mexico border. We are Northern Mexican, and she was given to a Spanish woman at 3 days old. And so there's not much that we know about her own mother. And that creates a lot of like turmoil within myself, because so many people that are Mexican are indigenous, and a lot of us don't know exactly where we come from because there's such a powerful like erasure of our stories and peoples. And being able to carry her with me and recognize how destabilizing it must have been to like be ripped away from her own family at such a young age, yeah, drew me really into trying to discover who I was. And I think at the same token, also being a daughter of the African diaspora, my father's father is Black Caribbean, lived a long time in Cuba, and has family in the Dominican Republic. There is a lot of questions around how we got here, were we on the slave ships? And for sure, I have cousins that are like our ancestral record keepers, and she's been able to make contact with the very person that did make that travel. And so that Caribbean ancestry is like really important in like who I call to the cosmologies and deities and orishas that I think really color and have always colored my existence. And it's been really interesting being all these things, right? Being European and being Caribbean and being Mexican. And how do they all make sense? And how do they all get honored, right? In like a single body. And I think a lot of people are, navigating what it is to be multi ethnic, multiracial, multicultural beings, and creating some really dope bridges and, liberating a lot of those ancestors that maybe, didn't have the opportunity to really show themselves or show their belief systems because of colonization. So it is a really wonderful privilege to be here and being all these beings, and carrying these ancestors with me. I think found a lot of resistance growing up because I grew up in the Christian church, singing in church choir, and I went to also Catholic school too. So I think deep in my bones, I was like always a really resisting kid and pretty much found myself in principal's offices like every week, and was thrown out of school in the 8th grade. I was like expelled from Catholic school in the 8th grade. So it's just resistance has been like deep within me, and I really get that from many members of my family. So it's been cool to find home with some of these ancestral ways, ancestral practices, with these people that are reclaiming their ancestry, because a lot of us are facing and recovering from colonial violence. And so I found that a lot of liberation is possible for people, especially today. So my ancestors are like doing backflips whenever I'm able to be in ways that maybe they weren't able to be. So, thank you.
Mm. It's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And, I love these stories of the ways in which we are truly seeking justice for our ancestors and continuing to weave that thread that was left for us to carry forward, and to be here in today's time and to have access to so many things that our ancestors just didn't have in their accessibility. It's such an honor and a blessing. And I feel that for those of us who are truly taking advantage of all of the beautiful opportunities available to us in this day and age that we're living in, it's one of the best ways that we can offer reverence to the ones that walked before us for all the work that they did to bring us here, and so I really feel that coming through in your words and in your sharing.
Ashe, thank you. I think when we speak to each other, it's like they're just all in the ethers, like they're having conversations. Like we're just little puppets for the conversations that they are having together. So like my ancestors meet your ancestors, and through us, right? Like we can change narratives and shift stories and really change the timelines that we will move into later. So, I think what a beautiful opportunity to just as a mother, seeing a mother recognizing like your parentage and recognizing how the kind of work that you're doing for the next generations by taking advantage of all of the privileges that you have that maybe your ancestors didn't have, and bestowing those blessings to your young. That is how epigenetic change occurs. That's how, entheogens can influence and inspire the undoing of intergenerational trauma. So, thank you for it. Thank you for doing what you're doing.
Right back at you, sister. And I'm excited to get deeper into this conversation, specifically regarding, ushering in this new generation. But before we get there, if you could share with us a little bit about, that turning point from resistance to facing your healing head first and really diving deep into this quest of self-knowledge and self-discovery. What shifted? What was that moment for you where you no longer needed to fight and struggle, but you were choosing to face these parts of who you were and learn about them more fully and discover the tools that you needed to walk your spiritual path? What was that turning point for you like?
Oh man, I would love to say that there's a turning point because I'm still resisting. I think resistance for real, rest is resistance. I think that, resisting tyranny and resisting colonial violence is a very important part of the makeup that I am. And so I think the ways that I've resisted have changed, right? Like I was resisting with like bad behavior and talking back and like being snappy. And like, I realized though that like, in a greater sense of things, that just like being a loudmouth like wasn't always going to be what would change the world, right? And what I've started to realize over time is like, how do we organize resistance? Like, how do we organize the evolutionary change necessary for us to have freedom and liberation? And it's been through like community organizing. It's been through creating a mycelial network of like resources, of thought leaders, of change makers, and like being an intermediary, right? Of like knowledge holders and keepers. And so I think actually things started to change tremendously after I sat with ayahuasca. I think was really an important move for sure. and yeah, sitting in like these kind of sister circles and spaces and circle spaces. But I had grown up with a tremendous amount of social anxiety because I was bullied. Oh my gosh, from like the get go was really hard. Yeah, I think my self-worth was like super tarnished, and my ability to build and form relationships with people was really tarnished because I felt that I couldn't trust the folks that I was around. I couldn't trust my family with secrets. I couldn't really confide in anyone about what was going on in my life or in my household. So, yeah, I kind of grew like a massive distrust. And I think my resistance was to people and community and connection. And now, where things have kind of like transformed is like through the mushroom and through understanding and learning how the mushrooms are community organizers of nature, right? How they never exist in isolation whatsoever, that they are constantly connecting, communicating, and moving resources from one place to another. They really helped me get this idea that we cannot create change alone. And it really wasn't until I started like sitting with Mashika people, you know, brown people with mushrooms in the space where it wasn't just about, oh, it's like my trippy visuals and my story and my like healing, but instead this is a community-based effort. So I started spending time in, you know, community gardens and watching demonstrations and being part of, you know, communities that were gathering and doing resistance collectively, that I was like, oh my goodness, I did not know that I could be part of a movement that is so very much shaping and impacting the world. So I think my resistance changed when my resistance transformed from being an isolated resistance story, me against the world, and turned into our resistance, from me to we, pretty much. And like, how do we create a movement for change? So that was incredible. And that took a really long time to figure out. And I, yeah, first sat with the mushroom like 9 years ago. So it took about, yeah, like 8 years or so to really understand that this is not an isolated pursuit or a solitary pursuit, but instead is like, how do I function within a community in a way that helps further the greater movement and the greater mission? So, yeah.
Beautiful. I love that. Yes, yes, yes. That is the mushroom consciousness, and really you spoke so eloquently there. And so, I'm such a fan of the mushroom, and I'm so excited to get to talk with you more, because I feel like, part of your work has really been in being a bridge for the mushroom and a voice, sharing your teachings or your learnings from the mushroom with others and helping it to become more accessible. And I really, admire the work that you're doing with the mushroom specifically, because I do feel like the mushroom has such an important role in healing communities and in bringing us together and unifying. And so, those words that you just shared are so resonant, because that is the medicine of the mushroom. And for that to be the first thing that comes out of your mouth when we start to talk about it gets me really excited. This is the first conversation on the podcast about mushrooms. And so I want to also just mention, I'm really excited for this to be that welcome of the mushroom onto this show, because it's been such a beautiful complement to all the work that we do within our organization. We're slowly starting to, incorporate more the mushroom through different tools, offerings, sharings, and teachings, because with plant medicine, what I have found is that the mushroom is that piece for bringing everything together. All the work that we do and all the different journeys and all this different spiritual paths, I feel that the mushroom is such an incredible tool for integration and for bringing into the material world everything that we receive in the astral plane, and the way that the mushroom works to ground and to bring into the physical, as well as the way in which we can utilize it in microdoses or smaller amounts on a more subtle level to support us in showing up and being that living prayer. Through my own experience, I have found it to be transformational and really pivotal. And so we're just kind of starting to share more about it with our community, to talk more about the mushroom. And so I'm really excited to get to hear more of your thoughts about what you've learned over your studies accompanying and walking with the mushroom. And specifically, maybe we can start with your concept of MushWOMB consciousness, because I really like that. And I think it's a beautiful place to begin this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And wow, what a beautiful introduction to, mushrooms onto the platform, because I just really do feel like they've been they've been my greatest teachers. They've been, they welcomed me home. I had my stint with MDMA. I had my time with cannabis, and the meandering relationship I had with cannabis was like fraught with a lot of not understanding the real psychedelic quality of this plant medicine. And so I found LSD when I was 19 and really enjoyed it and deeply loved it, and felt in a way it was a little bit too airy, right? Like it was very windy in the LSD space. And it makes sense because its doctrine of signatures, like its mother organism, ergot, it, grows on rye wheat and contaminated wheats and other things like that. And so it's like constantly being moved in the wind. And so it's like very airy and it's very heady for me. And I, after my journey, like went to the community garden and just like felt like I wanted to just put my hands in some soil and just like sit on the ground and just be like as close to under the ground as possible. And so shortly after finding LSD, mushrooms were introduced to me by a housemate. And oh my gosh, she just held me, and really claimed me as an artist. So some people will say, don't look in the mirror when you're on mushrooms, right? And that was like the first thing I wanted to do. And because I'm like a hard head and like very resistant, I was like, oh, let me just see what everyone is trying to keep me away from. Because I find that the things that people try to keep you away from are the things that tend to bring you the most power. So, I went in there and I looked in the mirror, and whoa, I never loved myself so much. And I never actually, for the first time, felt comfortable, confident, in love with my skin, and love with my, just who I was. And I looked at my room and was like, wait a second, you're an artist and you should probably call your mom. So I called my mom the first time I was ever on medicine. That was like the first instruction I ever got from mushroom was go speak to your mother. And me and my mom had a really fraught relationship. And you mentioned about how mushrooms can be really supportive for building community and like interpersonal relating and family life. And that was the first instance that I had that it might be beneficial to me. And so I called mom, and I'm really grateful that I did, because we never had such a sweet conversation. And I know later on when we spoke, maybe a couple years later, right before I was about to give her mushrooms for the first time, I reminded her of that conversation. I was like, do you remember that sweet conversation we had? She's like, I will never forget it. I was like, I was like deep on mushrooms, mom, when I talked to you. And she's like, are you serious? Could you imagine this thing that I thought to be afraid of was the thing that has really brought our relationship together? So, that is like mushroom consciousness in action, right? Like there are ways to honor mushroom consciousness and to act and be within mushroom consciousness. And for me, mushroom consciousness is many things. And what it is primarily is the intersecting points of womb wellness and entheogen education and entheogenic life. And there are so many intersections through history. There's so many markers of this relationship between entheogens and people who have wombs, intimacy workers and sex workers and their use of psychedelics. Like there's so many intersection points in history where those two things exist. And in today's world, such a distinctive need to address some of these imbalances of the womb through, internal journey work. And so the practices of womb care and entheogens can be, in the form of yoni steaming while on a microdose of medicine, or, addressing specific issues of the womb like endometriosis or fibroids or cysts by going in, to the medicine space and like really being open to understanding through a psychosomatic way what are the implications and spiritual causes of some of these things. And so, there's some ways that mushroom consciousness can be enacted and the ways that the healing can take place. And so I just really wanted to name that. And when I was coming up in this space and doing this community organizing work, I was asked to run a clubhouse room, which is like an old app, which is still functioning today. But, I was thinking to myself, like, what would I want a chat room to be about? What would I want the general ethos to be centered in? And what I noticed was a massive gap in the space that was meant to serve mothers and families, and the questions that they had around safety, around the efficacy of these medicines, the ethics of bringing entheogens into their family lives, and, a place for us to converse and trade notes about what we had been noticing while being entheogenic moms. And so that was the space I made. I called it the MushWOMB Temple because it made a lot of sense to me in the moment. And I'm really glad that it did, because it's a word that has like stood the test of time. I made that clubhouse room 3 years ago almost, and right in the peak of 2020. And it still lives on today as like MushWOMB Consciousness. And mushroom as a terminology, I think, is also part of my resistance to what I call algorithmic oppression, which is that, there's a lot of silencing, there's a lot of shadow banning, and there's a lot of ways that these pieces of education get censored by larger platforms and things. And so, anytime I would post or anytime I would, try to talk about this kind of education, it would get flagged or taken down or something like that. So I was like, well, how can I still talk about this and get this message to the people and still, still survive as a platform? And so mushroom became kind of the alternative word for mushrooms or psilocybin in all of the things that I was writing in order to stay alive, in order to stay afloat and to get the message further and further out. So, it's many things. And it's also a way of survival for a lot of us because the algorithm has not quite caught on to what mushroom means just yet. So, I think we just, like you mentioned before, leaning into all these tools that our ancestors maybe didn't have access to. But I think what's really ingenious is that our ancestors taught us to hide things in plain sight so that we could survive. And that's what a lot of my ancestors did. And I'm sure what a lot of your ancestors had to do. So this is the way that some of this education has been able to stay afloat while kind of dodging the algorithmic oppressors.
Wonderful. Wow, there's a lot there. And thank you so much for sharing that. A lot of different ways we could go in this conversation from just that topic, and that answer. I think I want to also reflect, when I first came across that concept of mushroom consciousness, which obviously I read about on your page, it spoke to me from a sense of reconnecting us to the mother. So, beyond those of us who have wombs, for all beings to connect with the matriarchal consciousness and the primordial essence of the great Mother Earth. And this is some of the medicine that the mushrooms do provide us, as well as all plants, right? But to be able to utilize mushrooms as an access point into walking with greater reverence and connection with the earth and greater alignment with our mother, with our origin, right? And so that's kind of what my kind of initial interpretation was when I heard of this term. And it's really great to hear all the different layers that it has been for you. And so, one thing that I wanted to touch on is this concept of, what it means to really bring forth the lessons that the mushroom, as well as all plants, have to give to us in the physical plane, and how we go about bringing it into our daily lives. You said something really, really beautiful and very true, is that so many of us, we go to these plant medicines or psychedelic medicines looking for the spiritual vision, or, the blast into the astral plane, without the understanding that these visions that we're seeking, they, if we go to the ancestral origin stories of the way that our ancestors worked with plant medicines and commune with spirit, the vision was present beyond just through our use with substances and with external medicine. So the vision was, we were very much more connected to our waking dream, and very much more operating from being able to go into a state of vision without having to take anything. And I think this is really important to bring into this conversation, because we're going to go into a little bit more of how these mushrooms can change, our daily lives, our relationships with our families, and how we show up as parents. And so we're going to get there. But before we do, it's want to just touch on this concept, of really why we're doing this work, right? Why we're going to these experiences, why we're seeking these ceremonial communions with these plants. And, for you to maybe speak a little bit on your understanding of, through your own studies, how these spiritual expansions and, profound connections that you've had with the mushrooms have led you into the changes and the shifts in your habits and your patterns and the way that you choose to show up in each day. If you could share a little bit about what you've observed within your own spiritual journey regarding the integration and really just the solidifying, right? The solidifying of these teachings, of the wisdom that we receive. I love that story of your mother, because it's really like, why are we doing this if we're really not making those shifts, if we're not bringing that healing, not just in the moment where we have this expansive connection and feeling of love, but what are we doing after we have that communion with the plant to begin to walk in greater alignment with the truth and begin to, bring greater beauty and healing to all of our ways of being and our relationships and the way that we're choosing to live our life.
Ashe, yeah. I think there's so many aspects and components within mushroom consciousness that people are deriving so much of their own interpretation and meaning for. So I just love to name mushroom consciousness as a very alive, integrated, unconscious piece in our world, because it's so unlimited. And I love what you mentioned about how mushrooms are an access point to like the greater mother, like Pachamamita, how it connects us to Mother Earth. And honestly, for me, like not this person of Mother Earth, but instead like the character and like the feeling and like the imprint of Pachamamita, and the way that, it doesn't look like the perfect mother, or like, this kind of like pastoral motherly being, but instead is this interwoven net, right? This network of all living things. And I have a tattoo on my arm of Maria Sabina holding a spider web. And for me, like Spider Woman and who Maria Sabina is, and the character that she has been in the cultural consciousness, and her relationship to like language and poetry and the weaving of words and worlds has been part of the mother archetype that I've really leaned into. And that mother archetype is super different for every person. So I just really want to acknowledge like the aliveness of Pachamama and the aliveness and the melanated nature that she is. Because when I see like La Virgen, the Virgin Mary, and I recognize, Tonantzin, and I recognize Gualicue, and just all of these like diosas de la tierra, and all of these primordial mothers, and these different traditions, and Tlatacutli, and all of these like mother archetypes, they don't look like the mother archetypes that we are shown today. If you look up like divine feminine, right? It like doesn't always really cover what so many of us really have come to know is the mother archetype. So yeah, thank you for bringing that forward, because the mushrooms have really taught me that my taught notions of motherhood and femininity have been so highly like colonized and bleached out, right? And watered down. So I love that you bring that forward, because I think even in my early motherhood journey, I was in a way aspiring to a kind of motherhood that wasn't even like authentically myself. And the mushrooms really helped me recreate that vision for me. So you mentioned about integration, and you mentioned about how we create actionable change through our relationship with sacred medicines. And you spoke about, waking life and waking dreaming and being connected to the other realm while here in this dimension, and integrating through our awareness of other spaces and times and the other realm while we are, transformational agents in this one. And I really, I want to respect how hard that process is. And it doesn't happen like in even the first few journeys, I feel like it does take some time to hear the messages of our ancestors and to like reconnect to the spirit world in our waking life. And it's not always super easy. And it sometimes, some people have genetic disposition. I think being a Caribbean person, I have a genetic disposition to like having access to those things because it was and is such a deep part of the culture. And I want to say that, the tribes of Europe were lost long ago. The reason that colonization could happen to me was because it happened to y'all in Europe first. And so, I want to say, like, for my European brothers and sisters, like, the skills are not lost. Like, your ancestors' ways of connecting to land and spirit are still super within you all. So I just want to like pray honor and give reverence to all the people listening to this podcast right now, that like these skills and talents and gifts are not lost to us, and they just take some time to refine and to like get back online and to like live inside of and practice, and they're worthy to be practiced. So I don't know why I'm getting so teary-eyed, because it was really hard for me to even recognize like the weird things about me were actually gifts, and to turn my reverence to sharpening those gifts, I think took a long time. So, integrating and bringing medicine into your daily life, something I always say is that our relationship with the mushroom, our relationship to microdosing doesn't have to start with consumption. That's been a really important thing for me. And you mentioned, consumptive patterns are like one way of communing with spirit, but not the only way. And I noticed as I was kind of walking with the mushroom, when I would like come in contact with the mushroom or be in the presence of a lot of mushrooms growing or a lot of mushrooms in my space, I noticed a significant shift in my home life, in myself, when I had access to them and when I was like in the presence of them all. And so I just, through like the law of emanation, know that, they are communicating, that they are very much alive, and that you can relate to them and listen to them without even having to have the action of eating them. And so to that, like I started making mushroom candles. And so started to like put candles, and dress them with mushrooms and to like bring them in like non consumptive pattern ways. And just notice that spending time with them was becoming more than enough for me. And I just kind of want to put that forward to the audience that, consumption is not the first step in relating, that you can get to know a tree without eating it, right? You could just go visit with it and speak with it and listen and be in the presence of these intelligences. And I call it like the many ways of knowing something. And that could be through the senses, that could be through dreams. A lot of people connecting to Amanita muscaria mushroom tend to dream about Amanita muscaria mushroom first. And so, we have to also expand our concept of what it is to know something and what it is to be in relationship with something or someone. And, as far as intention setting and praying and asking the mushroom for certain things, I'm like, what is that relationship like too? If I'm coming to a friend constantly asking them for a favor, right? What is that relationship? Is that relationship extractionary? Is that relationship reciprocal? And so, in today's life that I have, I rarely ever, quote unquote, set intentions, right? I don't go to the mushroom and say, this is what I want to work on, mushroom. Like, please take me here. Because more often than not, I'm going to go somewhere else. It's like going to your granny's house and saying, this is what I want to know from you, granny. And you might ask questions about it, but I'll tell you, like, grandmama's going to take you wherever she wants to take you and show you something that maybe you didn't even know you needed to. But alas, you received a message that was meant for you in that time. And many people will report this with medicine, with mushrooms. So, for me, I really love to come with the mushroom with a level of openness and a level of, thank you for teaching me. Like, I'm ready to learn what it is that you have to show me. And, I think intention is what brings you to the moment of the mushroom. Like, I came here for a reason. And yet in the moment that I'm sitting with you right now, I'm open to what you have to share. And that's been revolutionarily different for me, as in terms of how I've been able to, like communicate and received communications and what I call the assignments, right? And you mentioned about integrating these into our everyday. And I'm really reminded of my experience with you the first time I ever sat with Madre. And, you know, I had hormonal birth control in my arm when I went to go sit with you. And I had such a clear inkling, such like a clear, like, I had an assignment, and that assignment was to take out my hormonal birth control. And I actually had no idea what was going to happen on the other side, but it was like really clear that the medicine was instructing me that I needed to, take this actionable step. And so with all medicines, I feel that there is a level of, if I do come to the medicine with a question, sometimes I'm given a very clear answer, or sometimes I come a little bit confused about a particular aspect of my life. And to bring it home, my parenting journey, I've really asked the medicine, like, how do I approach these things with my son? Or, how do I approach extended breastfeeding? When is the right time to wean? How do I navigate his education? Like, how do I honor him and not just throw him away to the educational system? Like, how do I handle immunization? Like, how do I deal with these issues? And those are some things I've absolutely come to the medicine about. And I've cried in this journeys with medicine, and I've prayed, and I've just said thank you. And I'm like, wow, I cannot even begin to comprehend like the wisdom and the love and the understanding that the mushroom has really given to me when I've come to questions about my motherhood journey and about my parenting life. And it has been the primary medicine for me as far as how to integrate and make actionable change as the caretaker of a young person. So integration is very important. And so for anyone listening, I will say, I hope that you really do come with mushroom with a level of openness and curiosity for what it has to share with you about your life, and a distinctive sense of trust in what it has to tell you. And when the mushroom tells me something, I do my best to make the actionable change in my life in accordance with what it has shared with me. And the life that I'm currently living now is the result of all the changes that I've made on direct order from the mushrooms. So I'm really happy with where I am in my life. And I'm really happy that I put a lot of faith and trust in this medicine that I really do feel like had a lot of good things in store for me.
So much yes and alignment, full body resonance there. Thank you so much for sharing so many seeds of wisdom, and that I hope everyone is really tuning in and receiving the extent of this conversation, because it's so potent. And thank you for all of that you just shared. I really, it brings up this concept of how do we honor these medicines. And I love how you described it as like this courtship, really, of really being in relationship, and what it means to be in relationship with a plant or with anything, right? That it requires this reciprocity. And for me, the integration is one of the biggest ways in which we can be in reciprocity with these master plants and with these plant teachers. Because when we go and we make an action and we make a shift or a change and integrate the experience or the teaching into, our reactivity, or the way that we approach someone or something, or the way that we approach ourselves, this is the ultimate act of reverence and honoring for the wisdom that these teachings carry for us. And I think it's really beautiful because we're at this really pivotal time for the mushroom in society's consciousness, where it's becoming, it's the time of the mushroom in so many ways. I think the next 10, 20 years are going to be radical and life-changing and just very pivotal for society's consciousness. And I truly believe that the mushroom is really at the forefront of that. And so, if we look at, for example, cannabis and the story of the master plant of marijuana and its journey that it's taken, I think we can learn a lot about that relationship that we have as humanity from cannabis and learn from it so that we do something different with the mushroom. And, you mentioned it a little bit at the beginning of our conversation, and really how do we maintain the high vibration of these master teachers? How do we ensure that they don't fall in their frequency through human consumption and use and work with these plants? And I think that you really just touched on, to me, what I believe is the main way that we ensure that these frequencies don't fall, that these master teachers, they don't lose their potency. And it's in honoring them through the courtship and the doing of the work and the embodying of the teachings. And that really, to me, is like the most reverent form of working with these plants. And so thank you so much. And so beautiful to just hear the way in which it's brought you to your journey today, where you are today. And, for me, the same. It's like my path has been with the ayahuasca and the yahe, specifically the Colombian tradition. And for me, through my studies with the yahe, I've started to realize that all master plants are portals to the same universal consciousness. And so the mushroom for me is a newer relationship that I've been cultivating in recent years, but it's brought me, to the same place and even brought like a compliment that I wasn't receiving with my studies prior. And so it's been such a beautiful journey to really start to see the shifts that occur, and the way that the life I'm living now is a direct result of all of the teachings that I've received, all of the blessings that I've received through being having the great privilege of working with these plants. And, we spoke a little bit, you mentioned this concept, this idea of what we're bestowing upon our children, what is the legacy that we're leaving for our children and for the next generation. And I think that becoming a parent is a pivotal point in a person's spiritual path, and at least it was for me, because it no longer, but up until that point, it was really easy to think that I was doing this work for me. And once I started, and even maybe also for my ancestors, but once I became a parent and I realized that I had this enormous responsibility to steward and accompany this soul in this life, it was a real shifting point in the level of responsibility, as well as just the weight that this work carried for me. And it started to become so much more important. And I think even my work within the ceremonies, like you mentioned, started becoming really focused around how I could show up as a better parent, as a better person for my child, and to really just recognize that we are stewards of what wisdom, what way of being is going to be inherited upon the earth, right? So we inherited a certain way of being, and we have been here resolving and, coming into understanding of the inheritance we received, but we're ushering in this new time. And so the children that we are that are coming through us, that we're having the great gifts and honor of getting to learn from and getting to walk with, we are getting to have a direct role and impact in the world that they get to inherit and the type of existence that they get to experience on this earth. And that just shattered everything, my whole concept of what was real and what was not real, what was important and what wasn't, and it really just moved the needle in a big way for me and shifted my perspective, shifted my focus. And so I would love to hear, your experience with that, which I'm sure there's a lot of similarities, as well as, what you have learned along this journey as you've started to really utilize plant medicines and entheogens to support you in becoming the parent that your child deserves.
Thank you, for all your beautiful musings. And I just, one word that you mentioned a few times, right? Apparent. When I became a parent, and it's funny because the word apparent also means to make clear, right?
Mm-hmm.
To make something so obvious. And I think it is actually through parenting and through raising the youth and having this extreme responsibility for the the surroundings and the immediate environment of a young person as they live their life day in and day out, it's like becomes so obvious the impact of our own actions, the impact of the habits that we have within ourselves. And what I've been really learning and digesting with my toddler is that his inner voice, the voice in which he speaks to himself, is not just the voice that his father and me have spoken to him, right? And like his digesting of the way that we talk to him, but also him digesting and integrating the way that I speak to myself. And that's been like incredibly impactful, right? Because the stakes are extremely high in that case, right? And, like the way that I treat myself, the way that I rest, the way that I feed myself, the way that, I invest in my own art, and the way that I invest in my own life and do all these things, with myself is made visible to him, is like constantly observing the way that we interact with ourselves and in our own relationship. And, it's a big task. It's certainly a big task, parenting. And I notice, and what I found is that incredible sense that I am not in position to be his primary and solo care provider. And I have a lot of homies that are single mothers, right? And that parent their children without the grace always of a deeply entrenched community. And I really see like how hard that is. And even as someone who maybe doesn't have a massive extended family anymore, like myself, or like someone that might be listening to this, I know that it's the thing that really set me free and that really helped me navigate mothering in such a better way was my access to other caretakers, grandmas, aunties, uncles, really the like mycelial web and the net that like holds this one child. It's like so necessary. Like I had Martin, my son, in 2019, right before everything shut down. And so there was like very little access to any outside care. People weren't traveling as much anymore. I was very much parenting in an isolated environment. And I know that a lot of people also experienced that just a couple of years ago. And that constriction of isolation in raising children and rearing up babies is what was so suffocating to me. Like I had no time off, right? It was just me and the child. And I had very few hands to hand off to. I was getting irritable. I was getting upset. I was getting like just so overwhelmed with the loneliness of mothering and the loneliness that sometimes mothering can bring because we've changed dramatically as mothers, and sometimes our friend groups are not, walking at the same pace. We can't go out and do all the things that we used to do. And a lot of us are not just mothers, but we're also like solopreneurs. We're also raising up the babies of our own businesses and raising up our own visions and like trying to also manifest and create the world we'd like to live in, which isn't like, serving hand and foot to the man. And with the compounding pressure of a world that doesn't share or reflect the values that we might be wanting to have with our kids, that becomes an increasingly isolating experience as well. And so, I want to just give a shout to all the medicine mommies in the space because it's not easy to walk the path that we walk. It's not the most popular way. And maybe it's becoming a little bit trendy with this like microdosing mom thing. But for real, like, one of the ways that I see us continuing to hold mushrooms in a reverent way is what I call through the practice of rematriating psychedelic practice and rematriating medicine. Because for a very, very long time, mothers and aunties and grandmas were a lot of like the primary caretakers of not just the community of little ones, but also the community of medicine. And it's been like with our diligent care that crops have grown, and with our diligent care that ceremonies have been led and communities have been forged and held together. And so for this quote unquote psychedelic renaissance, right, to not include and center mothers and matriarchs and, this folk way that medicine has moved through space, especially with mushrooms, right? Like we look at Maria Sabina as a mushroom matriarch, and we look at the other incredible curanderas that have held, mushrooms so near and dear in our cultures, and, the mushroom priestesses of ancient Ireland, and, all of these important figureheads in the society that have had mushrooms so close by for so long to not be included in how we operate within, this mushroom time. It really is disheartening. And so in my practice, I almost exclusively source medicine from moms. So I shout out to all my mushroom cultivators that are mothers, my facilitators that, sit with medicine of mushroom, and they are, having children and things, and, their aunties and caretake children. I just feel that the same and similar faculties that we have to employ in order to support people in journey work are similar faculties that we must employ when approaching our children in like the deepest tantrum or in like the deepest like sorrow because they didn't get the thing that they wanted. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that care, that openness, that softness, and that firmness for real, like those good boundaries and that good like steadfastness that I think mothers can really have with their kids is very well welcomed in the medicine space. And I see as a facilitator in myself that the singing of songs and the patting on the back and the caring and the gentleness that I share with my son, I share with the people I sit for, and that same set of skills is it's so parallel in both of the worlds of mothering children and the world of mothering people within a ceremony context. So I think that is also another way that we can honor the changing of hands here when it comes to how mushrooms get disseminated into the public consciousness, is to ensure that the voices of mothers and the heads of families and birthing people are maintained as it hits the mainstream. And yeah, that's where I would like to leave that for now.
Thank you so much. I love it. And, beyond just ceremony and raising our children, it's the way that we want to live. It's the type of society that we want to cultivate from this place of compassion, this place of presence, from this place of honor and respect, right? And so it's so beautiful, these parallels you're making, and it extends beyond the home. It extends beyond the work in the ceremony. So when that becomes the foundation from which we're operating, everything shifts. And I know for me, a big shift in my healing work and my work within ceremony was when I became a mother, because the tools that I was cultivating in my motherhood journey, patience, presence, of really meeting my child where they were at, was the way that I approached my patients or the people that were coming to work with us. And so it's a really beautiful way to learn how to be like that, to learn how to live like that, because then the person at the grocery store who's checking out your groceries, they don't just become the checkout person. They become a brother or a sister who is also walking this path. And there's that universal connection there. There's that understanding, right? There's the dissolution of separation that occurs when we start to really realize that we're one human family, right? And that really is the inheritance, that is the legacy that we want to leave for our children. And so yeah, I love everything that you just shared there. And I would love to hear, a little bit more of the ways in which you have utilized. And I also just want to mention, like, so much resonance there with the isolation when it comes to the type of raising of our children that we're choosing, right? Because the more that we go into this way of conscious parenting, the more there becomes this huge gap between what is happening all around us and how society is perceiving and upholding the parenting journey versus what we're wanting to create. And so holding that prayer in the depths of my being, for this to become more of the norm, right? For it to become more accepted, more understood, and really more integrated into our consciousness as society and as humanity, as we make the great return back to the original ways. And like you said, this doing it by ourselves, it's not the human design. It's not how our ancestors parented or how children were raised in ancient communities. And so if we're really holding that vision of the ancient future of what a new paradigm that we're looking to steward, it also comes with this radical shift in the way that we look at our parenting journey. And for me, one tool that has been really crucial in, this journey of parenthood, this journey of, the weight that it is to be responsible for another human life and what everything that contains, is the embodiment of the truth that I'm not alone. And so whether it be, with the physical hands that are supporting me and carrying and raising my child, or the spiritual hands all around me, in the spiritual realm and the realm of the plants, the allies that I have, this shift in consciousness has also been enormous for me in showing up and how I relate in those stressful situations, in those moments that push me to my limits, to be in that place of remembrance that I don't have to carry it all alone, and to not fall into the illusion that this weight is only mine to carry, but to instead tap into the greater vision of what we are holding as a collective prayer for all mothers, all fathers too, for the next generation, and for how, we want to move forward as a society. So, on that note, I would love for you to talk to us a little bit more about this practice of microdosing in parenthood, how it's maybe been an incredible practice for you, how it supported you, as well as for anyone listening who may be hearing about this for the first time. I know that it's a very common question. Can I microdose and be responsible for my child? Is that a responsible thing to do, as well as any other questions that you might also be aware of within this topic that you could possibly address to bring some further information and education to our listeners.
Thank you so much. I would say that's probably one of the more common questions that I get asked is, how safe are mushrooms in all aspects of parenting life? And, especially around our children, like how available will I be while I'm in relationship with mushroom, like to my waking life and like to my child? And yes, absolutely. Like at these smaller doses, mushrooms can in ways even impact or benefit the way that we interact with our children. This, as you mentioned, patience, this, as you mentioned, presence, right, with kids. I think it can really naturally, create a sense of non-separation and empathy. And what a incredibly like triggering and what an incredibly like obvious place, right? To instead of asking the mushroom, how can I be a better parent to my child? We can instead bring the mushroom into our active parenting and see, what the mushroom would like to illuminate for us around the situation that we are currently in with our children, or the situation of who we are to our child. And, I really enjoy microdosing and parenting and being in the presence of my child while on medicine. And I will say it's not always the easiest choice, and not every dose has to be, with your young one. But I do feel like if someone is really interested in like making a radical shift in the way that they parent, that can be a really like potent combination. Being on medicine with and around your child, how can that illuminate the ways that we parent and the impact of our parenting on our kids? And I don't even like to make a distinction that only good mothers microdose, because I do find that there are a lot of incredible parents and have access to, more than a microdose with children present. There is a rich history of journeying in spaces where there are children present and involved. And so, adults on a higher dose of medicine can also very much care for children. And I've been in quite a few mushroom ceremonies where there's like teenagers in the house, or there's, babies in arms in the ceremony. And I'm sure you're very familiar with this as well in the ayahuasca traditions too. And in the spaces you've maybe held as well. And so, high dose or low dose, I do feel that, yeah, there is an okayness with children being present for it all. And that is very much up to the discretion of every journeyer and every individual family, and what will work for me, what will work for everyone. And I will say that, I also do respect and honor that mothers deserve their own time too, right? We're always so pulled into our parenting journey. Sometimes we are always the person making decisions and always in relationship with our kids. And it is such an important thing for us to have access to our own identities as well. And so I journey often in what I call mommy hours, which is like after the babies are in bed and everyone's asleep. I have my own journeys usually, and that'll either be a microdose or a full dose. And in that place in my home where my parenting goes on without the pressure of having to actively parent, I can then, dive in and ask these questions and be in the areas and the spaces where my child like frequents and ask these questions and hold his toy and, look at the spaces that we share together and like really imagine like, how can I reimagine this space in a better way for him? Or, how can this kitchen be designed in a way that like honors him too? So I think as much as it is safe and wonderful and effective to microdose around your kids, it can also be really wonderful to dose in the shared space without the pressure of having to actively parent. And I will say as well, I think one of the primary questions I get asked is around pregnancy and breastfeeding and birth and postpartum. And in these really delicate times where my body is so shared in the parenting journey, right? Like there's a little bit of distance once the child is not weaning anymore, that they are them and I am me. And, I can journey and it doesn't directly always like physiologically impact them. But when you are one body, when you are carrying your young, when you are breastfeeding your young, when you're in that really sensitive place right after birth, right? That is a question that I get asked a lot. And so I get asked about a lot of different kinds of medicine too. And so, yeah, I wrote a 50-page, well-researched guide called the Entheogenic Earth Medicine Assisted Motherhood Guide. It's quite wordy, but yeah, I really put so much of my efforts together to create a resource because many parents, even in the most underground and radical spaces where medicine is being spoken about, as soon as the question of mushrooms or any other medicine and pregnancy comes up, there is just so much ridicule and there's just so much like disrespectful language given to people that are just seeking out some kind of help, right? Not asking for permission, but instead just trying to discern for themselves based on what's in front of them. So, that was really my inspiration for, spending the 6 months it took to like really get this information together because I really didn't find it anywhere else. So, if people feel really curious about some of these questions, that is something that I really have focused on in the last few years is just doing my best to like reweave the relationship that birthing people have with medicine and how supportive they can be for all aspects of the motherhood continuum from preconception, so bringing children into the body, pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding, postpartum, and extended breastfeeding into the toddler years. So, really happy to help field some of those questions for you, Mariah, because it is such a cutting edge of this movement, right? Is to really reestablish relationships with entheogens and the youth. And that's definitely coming. And I think it's a really important piece that a lot of people are not interested in really talking about because there is already so much judgment on what mothers do. And I think for what the pressure of this day and age is, the alternatives are not any more helpful. The use of SSRIs in pregnant people and in folks that are breastfeeding are not even proving to be effective or very safe. And so the question is like, then what do we have? And what I found as a mother in my journey is that mushrooms have been my primary medicine for addressing the needs that I had as a pregnant person and continue to do so. So I'm really blessed and I'm really thankful that because I had a relationship with mushroom already going into my pregnancy, the question was, do I continue to maintain my relationship and in what capacity do I do so? And I'm really happy at the decision I made to continue because a lot of women are pressured into not continuing their relationship because of a pregnancy. And I really just don't feel like that's any reason to discontinue a relationship with any earth medicine. If
Mm.
anything, it is a really wonderful call deeper
Mhm.
into practice with them.
Mm. Beautiful. Thank you, my sister. I so appreciate that. And we'll definitely be including the link to that beautiful offering that you devoted a lot of time and energy into creating, because it's an important resource, and I think a lot of people listening be very interested in getting that information. And I think what you said at the very end is probably like that crux for me, as far as if we are really putting our faith in the plants, then they definitely 100% have a role in all phases of our life and all phases of our journey, to the extent that we want them to the extent that we feel that call to. And in my decade-long study with the different indigenous tribes of South America, I've had the blessing to bear witness to the different traditions surrounding pregnancy and motherhood, birth, and the use with the plants. And each tradition, each tribe has their own ways of working with their plants around this time, because it is a very delicate time, right? It's a time when we're bringing forth new life, and all the tribes, regardless of what their traditions are, they are always coming from a place of deep reverence and deep respect for the master plants as well as their power. And so for some tribes, there are times, whether it be during pregnancy or during the 3 months postpartum, where it's a time to diet from the plants, because the portal is open, and the soul that has just recently come through is still materializing in this physical form, that is seen as medicine, that is seen as such a high vibration, such a high frequency, that the woman, as the birthing person, as the person gestating and giving life, has the power within her to call upon the force of life to heal and to organize. But then there are other tribes that utilize it full force, all their medicines throughout the entire process. And you mentioned a really important point. It's like, well, if the other alternative is to go on antidepressants, where are we valuing the role of plants versus the role of pharmaceuticals? And, it's an opportunity to really test our belief systems as well as our conditioning around what is safe and what is not safe, because we have all this faith in plant medicine to heal, but then the fear comes in, regarding being around it with our child or breastfeeding our child with it. And that really is pure societal conditioning there, because we've been told that it's okay to take SSRIs and take antidepressants and breastfeed, where, that's such a questionable thing when it comes to the physical and spiritual impacts that it can have on a child so little and so young and new in this world. But then we still hold so much hesitation surrounding the plants during this time. And so I really feel like it really comes down to each woman's individual choice, as well as just each person's individual choice surrounding the plants and the plant medicine journey. But ultimately, it's such a beautiful opportunity to walk in greater faith and greater connection to the earth, right? And to really in full faith and communion. So with that, Mikayla, I just want to really honor you so much, and thank you so much for your time today and for all the beautiful wisdom that you shared. And if there's anything else that you want to share in closing with our listeners today, I really just thank you and wish you many, many blessings on your journey and all the beautiful work that you're doing.
Ashe Mama, yeah, thank you so much. I'm really inspired by the paths that we are both walking. I actually didn't even know that you had a child too, and so I'm just like really happy to hear that like we are in fact in a community of other like-minded folks, and I think that's a really important point to leave people with is as some of the assignments given to us by these sacred medicines. I find that, one that has really stuck like really close to my heart is something actually that I hear from people that sit in these mushroom circles with me is I don't know what healed or helped me more was the medicine itself or the community that I found because of this. And so I think that really does hold true for so many of us that are feeling lost and feeling like we don't have a connection point is, in fact, the same way that mushrooms can be a portal into this archetypal mother, it can also be a portal into a beautiful community and a beautiful mycelial web of not just people, but also the plants and also the animals and also the other beings that make up our huge and beautiful world. So, I hope that mushrooms can be an access point to not just your higher self and not just your inner child like it is, but also to the terrestrial, as you mentioned before, like pulling messages from the astral realm and like really materializing it here. Like I really find that for me, mushrooms are so terrestrial, are so connected to the earth. And that has been the greatest teaching of all, is how to get actually not out, but to go in and to go deeper into my life and the life of those beings that are all around me. So yes, thank you so much, Mariah. I really have appreciated being here, and just so much honor to you and your motherhood path.
From everyone at the Four Visions Market family, we would like to thank you for listening to our podcast. We really hope that you've enjoyed the conversation and gained many new insights on plant medicines, ancestral wisdom, and much more. Please remember to visit our website at www.fourvisionsmarket.com for more resources and information on plant medicine and spiritual tools. And please don't forget to follow us across social media for regular updates on upcoming episodes. We are grateful for your support and look forward to continuing this path with you all. Until next time, take care, stay present, and stay connected.